We're going to start talking about kids with special health care needs, but really every parent that I meet with, they're like, it's kind of basic nutrition. I'm like, it is. It's just kind of graduate level basic nutrition. Like there's some areas that we have to focus on. And then I'll go into tackling eating issues, which is that kind of has a feeding therapy vent, but I'm not a feeding therapist. I've been trained in certain areas, but again, I don't meet with the kids. I don't know oral, motor, sensory components necessarily. These are just strategies that I recommend to parents. And again, you might be doing with your own children. Or maybe you can say, ask your therapist if that's something that they would be working on. If your child's working at Child Serve, I know they do it all at Genesis Go Peds in the Quad Cities. They kind of do it all. They have a behavioral vent and all that. What I won't be talking about is the behavioral type of therapy. And that's not because I don't think it's a good thing, but it's just because I don't feel comfortable, requiring a child to eat a certain amount of bites, because I think that can go, unless you do it the right way, that can be tough. So I like the people who are trained in that to be the ones recommending it. And so I recommend parents go directly to the source there. Okay, so I like to start out a lot of my presentations with this quote. It's from one of my favorite dietitians, Ellen Satter. And the biggest thing for me is when the joy goes out of eating, nutrition suffers. And I think with our kids who have special needs or have different abilities, they're at the highest risk for the joy going out of eating, because people are putting pressure on you to not only have them eat, but to grow. And at the end of the day, like I tell parents, like my first thing is how are they growing? My second thing is how are calories and protein, which kind of affects that. Then we look at vitamins and minerals, but growth is still the top. So I know that's a big pressure, and that can really throw off the parent-child feeding dynamic, and that's tough. Okay, so I found two things that are common for all kids with special health care needs with eating. What do you think they are? It's a trick question. They're all kids, they're all children, they're all young adults, and they all need to eat. That eating might look a little bit different. It might be through a tube, it might be all in liquid form, as you said, but they need to do it. And their parents want them to be able to do it in the best way possible. So my job as a dietitian working with kids with special health care needs is just to find out what the family's goals are, to make sure that they're growing appropriately, and we go from there. And that can look different for every kiddo. I do have some different diagnoses coming up, but that's the whole point of that, is to even show within diagnoses, children are so different. Their needs are so different. So I'm a public health person, and it's nice to be able to group like things so you can say, if this, then this. But when you're an individual practitioner, you need to treat a child individually to do them justice. So just a little bit of demographics. 40% of kids with special health care needs are at nutrition risk. Either they have a vitamin mineral deficiency or they're just not growing well. And in Iowa, that comes to about 150,000 kids. So quite a few. Our younger population, and you guys might have seen this with your kids, the younger they are, the more likely they are to have feeding issues. And that's because they're born perhaps with not integrated suck, swallow, breathe, or maybe they need surgery. They just have a lot going on, so they have both higher needs and or they just don't have the skills, so they expend more energy. So the good thing is you can see this reducing as they get older and overall, but it's still much higher than the general population. And I think you guys know why we care. If we don't treat nutrition, it affects development. We're more likely to have delays, and I've definitely had kids before who are born with a developmental delay and they're just not making progress or they regress, and we do wonder if it's their nutritional status. We're measuring their head. The first thing to go is their fat stores. The next thing to go is their length, and then after that, the body protects the head, but if they don't have enough nutrition, it's their head growth, so that means their brain's not growing like it should. So that's why we want to prevent that from happening. I said the second thing that the body protects is growth potential. So not to say that we want kids to be the tallest kid in class, but we want them to be where their body was naturally meant to be. Because stunting, you can somewhat make up for it, but not 100%. So, you know, you don't want a child to be 5 inches shorter than they were as an adult if you can help it. And then doctors really care about nutrition. The reason why doctors, you could feel the pressure from them is that it does affect surgeries, it increases hospital stays, it impacts the outcomes of their interventions. So they're really caring about the health of the child, as we all are. So there's threefold things going on. Okay, so here's the condition tables. I have 2 slides, but the cerebral palsy and Down syndrome are 2 that I give as an example because when children with cerebral palsy are born, often they are my children who struggle to grow the most. And then if the feeding issues are worked out, if they integrate better, or they get a feeding tube, whatever the cause was for improvement, sometimes overnight they switch to being the children who are at risk for being overweight. And that seems like a cruel reality. That's the same for children with Down syndrome and Prader-Willi. Anytime low tone is involved, it tends to affect you negatively in terms of growth in infancy, and then you tend to have too much growth when the children are older. Children with cerebral palsy can have mixed tone. These are my kids a lot that have way lower energy needs. So and this is again when they're older. So, you know, some people say, well, that's good because maybe eating can be hard for them, but it's not. It's like you're having to do a full-time job and your boss says you have to do the same amount of work, but I'm cutting your hours in half. You still have to get the same amount of protein, same amount of vitamins, minerals, fiber, but do it with 300 extra less calories. So that's where we kind of tend to struggle with the vitamins and minerals. But again, every kid is different. I have children who are 21 and still very thin because they have a lot of high tone in their body. So I don't like to say, oh, children with special health care needs have higher needs or lower needs. It's just they're all over and you have to look at the kid themselves. So the big picture is they are more likely to be underweight, they are more likely to be overweight. They're more likely to have feeding difficulties, either because of sensory concerns, because of oral motor delays, or because they learn for the first 2 years of life eating hurt. They had a reflux, they couldn't keep stuff down, it was just painful. And now they have the choice to do it and they know they can say no and they're going to because their hunger cycle has just been dampened. They don't want to do it. If your child's on medications, we know a lot of medications can either increase energy needs or it can really kill appetite or it can increase appetite. That's something that we have to deal with quite a bit. Certain medications increase nutrient needs. And then in regards to altered nutrition needs, there are kids who can't have certain amino acids. And then GI troubles is last, but certainly not least. I brought up the reflux and constipation, and that seems to be the bane of many families' existence with regards to kids who have special needs. Okay, so what do we do when kids aren't growing enough? So anyone can feel free to chime in of here's what we did, here's what works, or we did it and it didn't work. The first thing you want to do is when you identify a child is say, okay, let's bring you back in a month or 2 weeks, whatever's most appropriate, and we need to get you on a regular schedule to make sure you don't fall on the growth chart. Depending on the child's age, the first thing we might do is calorie boosting if they're older. So that entails adding butter or oil. Parents are like, if I hear butter or oil one more time, I can't stand it. But the reason that us dietitians lean on that so heavily is because it has twice the amount of calories per gram as protein or carbs. So you can increase calories a lot, but not increase volume. And a lot of our kids are volume sensitive. So that's why I often have the goal for a lot of parents of add a tablespoon of oil per day. That's 120 calories. A lot of our toddlers need 1,000 to 1,300 calories. You took off 10% of the workload just with that tablespoon of fat. So, and then we have, if any of you want we have a calorie boosting handout. I'd be happy to send it to you. It's just tips. I think calorie boosting is pretty by nature easy. You find out foods that are high calorie and you offer them. And then it either works for your child or it doesn't. So if you're looking just for more ideas, I'm happy to send them to you. But typically, if that doesn't work, our growth monitoring shows, hey, we flatlined or we fell even further. We'll either concentrate the infant formula more, or we'll add toddler supplements, which Pediasure can be a bad word depending on who you talk to. But I will say that it can be a huge benefit to a lot of kids because it's high protein. It's similar in protein to milk, and it has 100 calories extra per cup. And then if a child isn't eating from all the food groups or eating is just hard, those extra vitamin minerals go a long way. I have some parents who don't like Pediasure. Their kids don't like Pediasure. So Carnation Breakfast Essentials sometimes goes better, or that Pediasure powder, you can add it in smaller amounts. If your child's eating actually really well, and I as a dietitian say their vitamin and minerals, I checked them off, they're doing great, then one trick I like to use is heavy whipping cream. If you add 2 tablespoons per cup of whole milk, you get it up to the calorie content from whole milk to Pediasure. And you didn't have to worry about the vitamins and minerals. A lot of kids really like that because if you were drinking straight heavy whipping cream, you'd think it was delicious. The caveat is, of course, that you have to make sure it doesn't bother their tummy. If they tend to have milk protein intolerance, or if the proteins in milk bother them unless they're heated or baked in, tell parents it's strictly fat, so they should be able to tolerate it from that standpoint, but the fat does slow down digestion. Let's see, regular feeding intervals, that is something that's huge, and I have a slide coming up on that. So a lot of kids, doctors say, get them to eat whenever they'll eat, whatever they'll eat, just feed them. And I cringe when I hear that, and I think we are getting away from it as a medical community, but I see that work for about 2 weeks, maybe a month. And then what happens is the kiddo learns, I'm in control of eating. So I only want exactly what I want to eat, and I want it when I want to eat it, which is based on playing time. It's not based on meal time. So mom makes a high calorie, high protein dinner for the whole family, and I just don't feel like eating because I was sipping on juice and eating crackers. So having regular meals and snacks is a big deal, and not allowing grazing, even though it seems like it's contrary. You want them to eat when they're hungry, but we've had pretty good studies that show that kids in general don't do a good job of regulating their hunger because, again, they'll always have let playing win out, or if they don't like eating, they'll choose to skip the really hard things, which tend to be meals where new foods are offered. So any questions on calorie boosting or ideas you guys are kind of struggling with?
We have to calorie boost because she was underweight. Mm-hmm. So then with that, how much do you still try to push like healthy eating habits, like vegetables, which she does not like?
Yeah, so I have a veggie slide coming up, so I will get to that because sometimes I think parents are like, so you don't care about the veggies? And I'm like, I do. I would be the worst dietitian ever if I didn't. I do, and I think sometimes I myself can be bad about that. Like we just let calorie boosting rule the show. So if you guys can take away anything from this, we shouldn't be putting pressure on you. Like I want to help you see the big picture and that you need to do what you feel is right for your child. These are just tips. And I think our job as practitioners, we're like, oh, hey, last time we recommended you this, how's that going? And then we assume everything else is going great. And so don't feel like nobody cares about the fruits or veggies or eating the foods the rest of the family is eating. It's just kind of our medical model that's not always ideal. So, okay. Constipation, you guys know that increasing fluid and fiber is a big deal. And activity plays a big part, which if a child has ambulation problems, can be an issue. I have a lot of parents say that the minute I get them in a stander, they have a blowout. And it's great that they loosen their bowels, but it's frustrating for parents. But to me, that shows that gravity plays a pretty big role in this. What I tell parents is nature's most potent food overall for everybody is the high sorbitol foods, so prunes. And prune juice is the highest source of sorbitol. And it's the natural sugar that pulls water out into the lumen and softens the stool. For some people, gives them diarrhea. For people with constipation, if they're going to have luck with food, typically it's our high sorbitol, prunes, pears, or plums, but prunes being the highest, that's going to make the difference. And if your child will allow you to do a tummy massage, that can be helpful. But at the end of the day, it's not uncommon for medications to be necessary, which I know a lot of parents would prefer to avoid that if they can. I'm not in the business of recommending medications, but if we've gone through all these options and nothing's worked, a kiddo is not going to eat if they have a belly full of, frankly, poop, because you feel rotten the whole time. So we have to get on top of that, and it's really important to get on top of that. Feeding therapists will say, like, let's take care of the reflux, let's take care of the constipation, at least get it under control before we start doing these interventions. This isn't particular to children with autism, but for any kiddo who learns that pooping hurts because they did have constipation and they withhold it and then the stool gets bigger and pooping hurts even worse, this is a good guide of having a toileting routine, how to reward them, things you can do. So I encourage you to check that out if that's an issue for you. In reflux, I gave it 3 bullets, but it really deserves so much more because it's only present in 1% of kids at 12 months. Doctors will say it's virtually non-existent at that age. That might be true for the general population, but I haven't found that to be true with the children I work with. It continues on into childhood. And like I said, that's one of the most common reasons when a child comes to me at 3 years and they're not eating well, we can pinpoint it back to the reflux. And that's also the most common reason if any of you have gone through multiple different infant formulas, doing different things with your breast milk or your diet, trying different medications. Those can work and they can get off the formula carousel at any point. But for some kids, it doesn't seem to matter what we do. And then doctors say it's simply a matter of maturity and having their tummy get stronger. We do still have kids have the Nissen fundoplication where they kind of tie off that tummy to prevent the reflux or have J-tubes. So that's, those are strategies that work, but they're big surgeries. And I should take this off of here because I think that sounds scary. But I just learned that at a conference and it was something that was new to me. So I like to share that reflux, if it gets high enough, it can affect the nerves in the esophagus. So it can impair swallowing. That's not to say it puts your child at risk for choking, but know that if you solve the reflux, it can take a while for those nerves to heal and for the child to just align their skills again. And even at that, we still have the learned behavior of eating hurts. So there's kind of a multitude of things going on there. Any thoughts or things that work for you guys on either of these two? Okay. So I'm going to go into general nutrition. And the reason for this is because a lot of the feeding therapies go through these progressions. And this is true. This can be used for infants. It can be used for toddlers. It can be used for kids who are school age. So a lot of parents start with purees. There is the baby-led weaning. Has anybody tried baby-led weaning?
Tried what?
Baby-led weaning. It's kind of the latest thing that we've been hearing in the feeding world. And it works great for a lot of kids, but it's where they can take a whole banana and feed it to themselves. They don't ever eat purees. And if a child is successful with that, parents love it. But the creator of it is, of course, so big into baby-led weaning. He said every child should be doing it. And then I read a panel that he was on. They said, well, what about kids with special healthcare needs? And he was so pro the whole article. And then he said, well, there are children who this might not be a good option for. And if the child's at risk for aspiration or feeding aversion, it might be this group. So it doesn't sound like anybody's pro baby-led weaning. It's not to say that I dislike it, but I don't know that it's an appropriate thing for any kid who's at risk for exactly what he said. So typically we want to start with purees, smooth foods, just to get the child used to having a bolus in their mouth. And then in feeding therapy, what did they have you move on to next? Or what did you do with your kids in general? Yep, solids. So I should have told you, I kind of broke them apart, but meltable hard solids. Ones that if you put in your mouth will disintegrate. And the whole point is that you graduate from just a puree to having a solid that requires no chewing. And so that's stuff like puffs, graham crackers, veggie sticks, anything that as soon as it gets in your mouth starts to break down. After that, you have the soft mechanicals, things that maybe require a little bit of gumming or chewing, but not much. If you offer it in small pieces, if it goes down, it's not going to pose any risk or discomfort. So that would be your soft pieces of banana in small pieces, not the whole banana like baby-led weaning, or avocado, strained veggies from a can of soup. Once they get better with that, you can do the shredded cheese, scrambled eggs. And then once they've shown you they can do a little bit of up and down munching, then you can go under the hard mechanicals that require the rotary chewing of the jaw. So that's stuff like Cheerios. A lot of people start with Cheerios, but that should be farther down the line. That's stuff like meat and pretzel rods. And after they've gotten all that together, I say we can start with mixed foods like soups or stews or, heaven forbid, stage 3 foods. I say heaven forbid because I hate stage 3 foods. I wish they didn't exist because so many parents are like, and it makes sense, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, but that is also where I hear a lot of parents say, well, they're not eating well, and it goes back to when they started stage 3s because all of a sudden you're eating a puree, you like it, and then you're introduced to something you've never experienced before, a chunk. So if a child's at risk for a feeding aversion, they either learn to spit that chunk out or they swallow it whole. So spitting it out means they don't want a puree ever again, or it takes a while. Swallowing it whole means it works for that food. But when you try to progress, you can't swallow a piece of hamburger whole. You have to do some chewing. So they don't move. They get stuck at the soup point, the soft soups, the oatmeals, the yogurts, stuff like that. Okay. I also get the question a lot is how much should I be feeding my kid? And a guideline we use a lot is 1 tablespoon of food per food group per year of age. So that's a lot of words, and it's hard to wrap your mind around. But let's just take out milk, set that on the side. We're having that in our cup. You have 4 food groups. So if you have a 1-year-old, that's 4 tablespoons or 1/4 a cup of food at 1 year old. So a 1/2 a cup of food at 2 years old. Are they going to eat that every single day? No, but it just lets you know, like, okay, are they eating about the right amount overall, yes or no? And then I put that 1/4 of an adult's portion size, but I think it's hard for us to know. So here's a picture of it. Here's serving sizes by age. Okay, so I wanted to get into individual nutrients. What do you think is the nutrient of biggest concern when I meet with parents? Almost every single time I hear, I'm worried about my child getting enough of, aside from calories. It is protein, because protein is in vogue. And with good reason, protein is good stuff. But I think it puts a lot of pressure on parents because meat is a hard food group for a lot of our kids. And they feel like unless they're eating a hamburger every day or something like that, they're in trouble. But what I tell them is protein needs are actually pretty low. So this is a minimum that you would want to meet. But let's say like my 13 to 47 months. Example protein, they should get at least 17 grams per day. So you'd have to do this calculation. But that's pretty doable if your child is eating from all food groups, or especially if they're drinking milk. It's when they're not eating any meat and they're not getting any dairy products that I start to worry. And that's not to pick on vegans, because vegans often choose that and they do a good job of balancing it out. But if a child isn't eating that, it's usually because they're really selective in their eating. So they're not getting, milk is a complete protein, soy is a complete protein, and any sort of meat is a complete protein. But beyond that, we're kind of stuck. So if a child isn't eating any of those things, then we have to start pairing about like the rice and the beans, and they might not like beans. So I have had, it doesn't happen very often, but in the last couple of weeks, I've had 2 kids that aren't getting enough protein. But again, largely if your child's drinking a formula, a milk, or eating 1 source of meat a day, they're doing pretty good. So here's kind of your guideline. Does anybody have any questions about that? No, I'm glad you asked this. So this is for kids who are needing to do catch-up growth or have some sort of injury that they have higher needs. So if your child is needing to do catch-up growth, which is true for a lot of you, they are going to be bumped up, but it still tends to be reasonable. Again, I rarely have kids that are below their minimum needs.
I'm thinking of James right now, and yes, and he, the Pediasure, the peanut butter, chicken nuggets, but it's the example weight that caught my eye. In this case, he's below weight.
Oh, so this is just,
The
I
example
just
of-
kind of went in the middle of the age range.
Okay.
So ignore this. This was just to give you an example protein.
Okay, so
Yeah.
where he's at is okay, or?
Well, and I don't
Yeah,
know,
right.
James, I don't know his growth chart, but one thing I don't have in my presentation is we do have new malnutrition guidelines.
Okay.
And what we tell parents is, what we tell doctors should be incorporating it as well, will be coming down the pike, is they should be looking at weight for length or BMI for age. Because I think a lot of parents live and die by that weight, but for me it's like, well, what's their length? Does it match up? Do they have fat stores? Because what I said was the first thing to go is fat stores,
Right.
then it's length, then it's head. So with those new standards, we should also be measuring their arm circumference, and that tells us that's the best measure of how much fat stores they have.
Okay.
Yeah. For the whole time that I was a practitioner until the last year and a half, it was like child has to be at the 5th percentile or not. And we've kind of gotten rid of that. We go off of something called Z-scores where we can just compare the child to themselves. And that's where you find success and you can see true movement. Because a lot of our kids are stuck at the 0 percentile for a long, long time. And that's frustrating. So other nutrients, I put this up here. I don't know why I put it up here. It's nutrients of public health concern, but they go through different ages. The nutrients that I see being an issue for the kids I work with are the fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin D. And that's because there's not enough, we're all vitamin D deficient, particularly between the months of June and January. Even if we're out, or June and September, we're doing fine. But aside from that, unless we are going south for vacation, your skin just can't make enough, even if you are out in the sun. And if you were getting enough from your diet, I'd be worried. It's because you'd be drinking far too much milk. Fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin E, because that comes from veggies, meats, and nuts. Some things, those are really hard textures. Folate, if they have problems transitioning from formula to table food. B vitamins, but particularly folate, because infant formula, a lot of doctors like to leave kids on infant formula past 1 year of age, and we're not getting enough folate in that situation. So that's what I really worry about. Iron, of course, comes up a lot, but I'm often surprised if kids eat a lot of grain products like granola bars, cereals, crackers, sometimes they are able to eke above that line with their iron. Calcium, if they're not drinking enough milk, and potassium, that's true for every kid if they were eating above the recommended amount of fruits and veggies. So that's when I tell parents, not necessarily, don't worry about it. Do any of you have specific nutrient concerns for your kids? Things that have kind of flagged low? And it's not like, what's that? Right. Right, that was the next point I was gonna bring up. It's not like, aside from iron, we're pretty good at checking a hemoglobin, doing a finger prick. They're not doing a lot of tests. They are doing vitamin D more and more often, again, because we're Iowans and we know that we often have inadequate stores. If your doctor is really worried about it, there are tests for each of these. Each of the tests is kind of variable in its nature, but I would say potassium, calcium's a tough one. I would just say, are they getting enough? Are they meeting the recommended amount? Because your blood level of calcium could be really good, but that could be because you're pulling calcium from your bones. So that's a tough one, and when we just need to meet the recommendation. So what do we do about it? So ideally, it comes from food. So I don't want you to feel like the solution isn't food, but a lot of times I could say, well, we need to get 2 cups of fruits and veggies in to meet whatever need. And parents say, yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So what I tell them is, okay, we need to fix the now. And my favorite vitamin is still the Flintstones chewable, a half a tablet a day up to 3 years of age. And a lot of parents use the pill crusher. The reason it's my favorite, not because it's an oldie, but it's a goodie, but it actually covers all the vitamin needs except for calcium. Calcium's not in any vitamin mineral beyond like 6%, but that Flintstones does have the folate, it does have the iron. The Polyvisol, the Zarbee's natural liquid, doesn't have the B vitamins, and it doesn't have a lot of the fat-soluble vitamins, aside from vitamin D. Calcium, they do have those chews, but you would need, like I had a 10-year-old the other day, to get 75% of his need, he would need about 6 of those chews per day. So that's quite the habit. If he does it and they want to pay for it, I'm completely okay with that. But the liquid form, it's called Wellesse, is my favorite because it's the easiest to get in. Some people do Tums. I feel funny about that, so I tend to stick to the liquid. And again, it's ideal. We want to try to get them towards milk, or we want to try to get them towards a milk replacement product, but that's not always possible. So we have to fix it right now, so that, because it could take months, and we don't always have months with that. Any questions? Okay, here's the veggie slide. I promised it was coming. So what should you do if your child doesn't eat fruits and veggies? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can't force a kiddo to eat anything, and I'm sure we've all learned that. It's just a battle that we're not going to win. So what I tell parents is whatever you do, don't give up. Just kind of take the pressure off of, I'm going to offer it. I'm going to offer it at lunch and dinner, and try to get one in at breakfast and snacks, and keep exposing them to it. And I know that sounds hokey, it feels frustrating, but what I see happen a lot is some parents just stop offering fruits and veggies, and then it's off the kids' radar forever. They're like, well, I never see this, why would I eat it? It's not to say that if you present it every day, they're gonna say, okay, you wore me down, I'm gonna eat it. But it's eventually gonna start building pathways of, hey, I've been around those green beans for 3 months, they didn't kill me, I saw my brother eat them, he seemed to like them. Maybe I'll try it, I might spit it out, but it's all about building brain pathways. When I talk to parents about ways to expose them to foods, I say, not that we want to be sneaky, but don't be afraid to add like the canned pumpkin to your marinaras or your soups or your casseroles. Don't use a pumpkin pie mix, but that's a great one. I do that myself. Some parents use like pureed baby spinach and add that to their soups. You want to start small and make sure it doesn't make a big change in the taste or the color. But a lot of our casseroles or meat dishes, like meatloaf, if you're a meatloaf eater, will hide that stuff pretty well. And then smoothies, we often joke that if we can get a kid to drink a smoothie, we can get anything into them. So those are a great way to do it. I have some other tips here, but I can't overstate enough. The biggest thing is just keep offering it. Try to get a fruit and a veggie at every lunch and dinner, because if we don't, we're gonna lose it. So is that an immediate solution? It's not, but the feeding therapy type suggestions might help with that, and those are coming up here soon. Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about drinks, because this is another big issue that a lot of kids come in on. They feel most comfortable drinking, and that's true. But unless there's a physiological reason, we want to try to keep milk to 16 to 24 ounces, because 24 ounces of milk is 450 calories, which is okay. But if you get up to 30 ounces, you're tipping the scales of 500. And my biggest thing with 30 ounces of milk is that calcium is going to bind the iron, and a lot of kids at that level are going to be anemic. So that's why some is good, but more isn't necessarily better. In juice, if a kiddo is drinking 3 cups of juice, that's 360 calories. So you add that to your 450 calories of milk, they're over 800 calories. Your typical toddler, let's say they need 1,100 calories, you're 75% of the way there. So it's kind of like, well, no wonder they don't have an appetite. Now, that's not to say that was the cause. A lot of times they get there because that's the food they're most comfortable with. But what I'll say is, let's try carving that away, taking out little chunks at a time. And I'm okay with getting rid of juice entirely. The only time I ever recommend it is if a kid's constipated. But I say if 2 ounces doesn't do it, more isn't going to. So when a kid comes in drinking 20 ounces of juice, it's just not necessary, and that's the first thing to go. So that's kind of the scourge of childhood. And And again, that sippy cup of juice, I think a lot of parents say, well, there's nutrients in it. There is vitamin C, but they can usually get that with even 1 cup of milk. So let's just limit it to half a cup. Milk we can take care of later, but juice, yeah, that we need to get under control.
I'm not trying to stir the kettle. I just have a question.
No.
With typical kids, my understanding is you're trying to eliminate the juice, minimize the. Why does that change for special needs kids when we're pumping in Pediasure in massive quantities? What makes it okay to say juice and Pediasure? And I can pull up the ingredients for Pediasure. It's sugar. It's sugar in many different forms. So why is that okay for special needs kids whose nutrition, they're more sensitive intestinally, stomachs, we have vomiting issues. Why are we not looking at Pediasure and all of that stuff that's going in?
Right. No.
Why does it change for those special needs kids?
You're absolutely right. For me, why I said, let's get rid of the juice and worry about milk later, because what does milk have? It has protein, it has calcium. That's true for Pediasure, but I would rather see a kiddo drinking milk if they have a special healthcare need than Pediasure any day. So that's why I'm always quick to do the heavy whipping cream trick over Pediasure. And then quite honestly, we can do the Flintstones. We could do half the Flintstones plus the whole milk. So I do try to get a lot of parents to do it. And I stopped short of saying Pediasure can be a bad word for some parents, because if you've used it before, it can be a lifesaver. But us dietitians do hate the sugar content. Sometimes we'll try to get them on the enteral product. I don't know if you tried that. That is reduced sugar. And the reason that the sugar content is so high is because they want to make it palatable. Sometimes when kids transition to Pediasure as a tube feeding formula, I'm like, why? They don't need that sugar. We can completely cut that out. I love Complete Pediatric. They did have a reformulation. Does anybody's children have feeding tubes? No? Okay. So they did have a reformulation, but that is a whole blended foods product. I've had some parents offer it orally by mixing it with fruits and veggies. So that's one option. I've also tried to give parents options of making their own form of Pediasure, which I think would be ideal, but I think a lot of parents, try it for a couple days and they're like, that's tough. It's a big time requirement. But I'm not answering your question saying like, oh yeah, Pediasure's fine. Dietitians, it drives us nuts, but it's a necessary evil. And you're right, I would like to see kids with special healthcare needs not have to have that product. So we always talk about someday there's going to be a replacement for Pediasure, and it's going to be a wonderful day. I hate that Pediasure is marketed towards the general public as if your kid's a picky eater, you should eat this. Because if you've had to have your kid on that, it's not ideal, and it feels like a Band-Aid.
Thank you.
Do you have any other thoughts on it? I mean, it's a very good point.
We did go down the potentially a feeding tube route, and I am not a fan of Pediasure. I don't, with typical kids, it's lay off the sugar, back off, and when it comes to feeding tubes, it's like, oh, this is okay. But it's, if you look at the sugar source, it's various forms of sugar sources. So how come just for the sake of calories, we're going to go sugar route? And it's okay to pump this into special needs kids. But with a typical kid, if I went in and said, I'm going to give my kid this many grams of sugar a day or just give him Pediasure, they think I was nuts.
Right.
So I'm trying to, why do we create such a different standard based on the method of feeding, I guess?
Right. And trying to reconcile that, it's in the name of calories, and I hate to say it, but it's true. And I think they found that adding the sugar works the best, and it's not my favorite. And that's why if there's another option, we try to get around it, because kids also get stuck on it. I hate that they won't drink plain milk. Even when they're done with Pediasure, they have to have chocolate milk, and that's like, oh. So I fully agree with your point, but, and I acknowledge that it's a problem. Sure. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. So here are my quick guidelines for just kind of couching how to offer things and to hit some of the basic needs. Make sure that you're offering every food group at lunch and dinner. Offer at least 2 of them at breakfast and snack. And again, that goes to the exposing. You don't want to make special meals for your kids, but at the same time, you want to make sure that there's a food at each meal that everybody at the table likes. They don't have to all like the same food, but there should be a safe food that, you know, if they're hungry and they don't feel like trying what you made today, they can fill up on bread and butter, or their macaroni and cheese is there. That food should be offered to everyone. They shouldn't get a special meal, but don't leave them falling apart at the mealtime, because you know how that, I don't know if you guys ever had that when you were a kid. You just look at the meal and you're like, there's nothing for me here. I'm going to have to eat, I pick on green beans, but that was my hated food at the time. I'm going to have to eat 5 green beans because I'm 5, and that's awful. Whole grains. Talk to your healthcare provider about what type of milk. There are the guidelines, but I have plenty of kids that are on whole milk, way beyond 2, and that's what they need to be on. So I don't want to give any recommendations on that. Remember, meat isn't the only source of protein. You can get it from a lot of different places. So if your child isn't eating meat, and that's what you do as a family, we want to work on it, but your child isn't nutritionally compromised without it. And then don't let your kids snack or graze throughout the day. And I'm going to move on just so I can get to that point. So here's where the resources come in. And I'm probably going to have to start going faster, so I apologize. But Ellen Satter, I don't know if any of you have heard of her. She is a dietitian and a social worker. A lot of the feeding therapy models base their work off of her division of responsibility. And it's that parents have a job and children have a job. Parents choose when they offer food, what foods they offered, and where they offered. And then kids get to decide, am I going to eat that food? Does it feel good with me today? And how much? And she said, sounds simple. And if we truly do that with all of our kids, we get what we call a competent eater. And a competent eater does all these things. They come to the mealtime happy. They might not like everything served. They might not eat it, but they're not going to throw a fit, and it will help with growth. Now, one thing with Ellen, she says a child's eating job, if they do it properly, they'll grow in the right way. I don't know that this is necessarily true with all of our kids, because again, if you don't feel good, you're not going to eat, and you're not listening to your hunger, so you're not going to grow. So sometimes I think parents hear this and they're like, well, I didn't do that with my kid and I feel bad. But like I said, if a child's really, really small, and you just have to do what you need to do. But to the best of your ability, try to maintain those roles, and don't push your child to take a certain amount of bites. If they're not ready for it, just say, okay, maybe another day. And we'll have some tips coming on that. So we made a video as an agency on how to follow Ellen Satter. The link's down here. I don't know. I'll have my email at the end. So if you would like all these resources, because I put a lot in here, please email me and I'll get that to you. But Ellen Satter, her website's great. Seriously, check it out if you've never heard of her before. Because she's the one that said we need to end the grazing. This is the eating pattern of a kid who eats meals and snacks, so our big circles are our meals. This is the hunger hormones. So insulin goes, it zaps up the blood sugar. It's like, hey, ghrelin, tell the brain that the kiddo's hungry. So it does that, and then the kiddo eats in a substantial amount. But when a parent is told, feed your kid whenever, wherever, they never get that ghrelin cycle. They never get that hunger satiety. So they're playing. Okay, it's lunchtime. I'm not really that hungry, but mommy did make macaroni and cheese for me, and I love macaroni and cheese, so I'll eat a little bit more than I typically do at snack. Then I go down for nap, and I wake up, but it's not time for a meal yet, even though I am hungry. But I have a little snack. I eat my crackers. I sip my juice till my siblings come home for school, and I was snacking the whole time, and mom and dad had a nice spaghetti dinner with breadsticks and salad and fruit. But all I want is the breadsticks because I'm not really that hungry. I would rather play. So if I were a good visual person, these circles would be far bigger than these. But that's why, like I said, we do have really good studies that allowing the grazing, allowing the juice, allowing the snacking leads to decreased appetite and decreased intake for some. And if a child really loves to eat, it leads to overeating in others. They just learn to overcompensate and kind of ignore that feeling. So that is one thing that I'm constantly telling parents is, like, if you're going to have juice, okay, but put it at snack time. Don't let them walk around with a sippy cup of juice. Don't have crackers throughout the day. Any questions on that? Okay. K2Me. I don't know if any kiddos have done the Sos Feeding Therapy, but that is if you have the food hierarchies, the food play where you walk the chicken nugget up to your face like it's a puppy. That's K2Me. Her information is right here, and her whole thought process is based on these myths. One of them is if a child's hungry, they'll eat. And she said that, no, that's not the case. So you've heard me say again and again, if a child doesn't feel good, they're not going to eat. Also, another myth is that eating's easy. She said eating is not easy. It requires all 7 sensory systems is what she says. And that adds proprioceptive, which is pressure, and then their place in time. So there's a lot going on and it's not easy. So she puts that together in this article, When Children Won't Eat. So if you're kind of feeling frustrated, my kiddo won't eat, she gives you a good overview of that and what to do. I'm going to talk about the someday plate. Steps to eating is next. Sensory progression of foods is her. I start with the purees, the meltables, the hard chunks, and then I put them together. Okay, so I like to give this to each one of my parents, and this is eating a yes, no event? Nope, it's a 32-step event. So if your child doesn't like a food in the room, they get mad, then they're down here in the tolerate zone. But if we kind of work on it and they will smell the food, they're okay with it, they'll even touch it, that is a huge jump. So I encourage a lot of parents to laminate this, put this on their fridge, and if you're working on a specific food, you can write it and show the progression. Because I think, again, we just get stuck with, did my child eat it, yes or no? But you have to appreciate the big battles or the little battles. Okay, so here's the steps of eating just with the chicken nugget. And again, I'm not recommending chicken nuggets, it was a good food. So child allows the nugget on the plate. Maybe you try getting them to stab it with a fork or tap it like a drum or dip it in their favorite sauce so they're touching it a little bit longer. Smelling it, you're getting it closer to the face. And again, walking it up their arm like it's a puppy. And you could say, oh, is the puppy done walking? And they're like, yeah, the puppy's done walking. Get that away from my face. So you're respecting them. You can get them to kiss it. So you're pretty far out the stages of eating at that point. And then our end goal is take a bite. But that's just to show you there's a lot that you can do in between these two. Okay, food chaining is another big thing that happens in therapy. This is a great article down here from the makers of food chaining. And the whole point is you take the foods that your child already likes, do something called flavor mapping, and you try to find ways to get them to a food that you really want them to eat. So McDonald's chicken or French fries is a great example because I have a lot of kiddos with autism that will only eat specific French fries. So she said maybe you can take your McDonald's French fries and break them up into different pieces and then do different brands. For me, that could take, we would probably have to add 5 steps in between there. So not only breaking them up, but maybe taking them out of the package. They're not in that red box. Maybe you sprinkle them with pepper. Maybe you sprinkle them with garlic or Parmesan cheese. So the whole point is they see that food as one specific thing and a slight change as a whole new thing. So you have to give them tolerable baby steps. Okay, this is a handout that they just talk about breaking down the food or adding it to a new food, which is what they call flavor masking. And you can get that at this link here, which you can't see, but if you email me, I'll get it to you. And this is just one that I did with a kiddo who liked Cheerios and sprinkles. We really needed him to get to milk. So if we add the Cheerios and sprinkles together, you pour the milk in, you get the colored milk, that might be enough for him to be somewhat interested, and maybe we get a few ounces in per day. Bagel Bites are a really complex food. The more complex the food the child likes, the more opportunities you have for sneaking things in. Pizza sauce, again, you can mix in the pureed pumpkin or the pureed spinach. That might be farther down the road, but you just have more options with your bagel, with your cheese, with your sauce, with your deli meat or pepperoni, whatever you do. Okay, Marcia Dunn Klein. She is wonderful. She has these articles on her website, and they are right here. I encourage you to check that out because I'll give you one of them on the next slide. But I think her philosophy is beautiful. Feeding is first and foremost a special relationship with a parent, and basically we need to protect that relationship and allow parents to get back to that. If child's growing well, we need to take the stress off because it's a traumatic event. We need to step back, address that, and help them move forward. So her whole premise is we get permission. We make sure that the child is okay with eating a food, okay with trying a different strategy, and that keeps our stress hormones down, that allows appetite to come up. She's the one who really resurrected the blended tube feeding diet, which has been a game changer for a lot of kids that I work with and for a lot of families. And then art of crumbing I talk about next. So it's just a way, if your child likes like graham crackers, you can crush them up and you could have them dip a piece of pear in the graham cracker. They might not eat that piece of pear, but they're at least interacting with it. Or you can sprinkle it up on top of yogurt, or you can mash it really fine and mix it into yogurt that they might already like. But the whole point there is that you're increasing the consistency, you're getting a thicker texture. So this article, which is on her website, gives you different ideas of, you can go from snacky type crumbs to healthy crumbs. You can go from browns to a bunch of different fun colors, from sweet to savory. Okay, Suzanne Evan Morris, she partnered with Marsha Dunn Klein and wrote a book on pre-feeding skills that kind of rules a lot of the feeding therapy people. But she had this good article on, does your child have sensory issues with eating? Well, maybe you need to look at these 8 aspects and find out where your child is in the continuum. So if you're wondering, why does my kiddo like these certain foods and not others? A lot of times you can pick out themes, but if there's some that kind of strike you, you can go through each one and try to find what the commonality is. So resistance is one example. You bite down a graham cracker, it goes poof, explodes in your mouth. If you bite into a raw veggie or beef, that's not the case. So she said, try to sort it out and maybe don't go from offering an easy resistance food to hard. Maybe you meet it in the middle and go medium. Okay, so putting that all together, I think a big thing is don't pressure a child to eat unless you're doing a program where they're couching. We eat for 5 minutes, we alternate between bites, and they know that there's a beginning and the end. Usually that pressure just leads to stress and that decreases appetite. And whatever you do, be consistent because kids are smart and they catch on. Don't make special foods for a kiddo. And for a while this could look like the special foods you do make for them, you offer to everybody else, and then you offer them your food. So you're essentially doing the same thing, but you get them on board with, I eat the same foods as my family. Maybe people don't eat as much macaroni and cheese as I do, but it's still offered to them. And avoid food jags, because aside from dietary variety, I worry about that child getting tired of the food. It's like you eat a food more and more often, you start to pay attention to it, they start to say, oh, there's something about this food that I really don't like. And like that, my macaroni and cheese that I brought up is gone. And we lost a big source of calories, B vitamins, and fat. So if you can't limit it to every other day, try to change one aspect of the food. And that's really the food chaining. So sprinkling it with garlic powder, the Parmesan cheese, building a pathway in their brain that it's a different food and it was okay. Okay. So family meals, I think we all know why they're important for everybody, but particularly for kids with special healthcare needs. It creates a routine, and a lot of kids love that structure, and it provides a regular way to expose them to the foods that they don't eat in a safe place. They won't have to eat them. It also gets them involved. They get to be there when you're cooking in the kitchen. If they're able, they can help you stir, they can help you pick between different veggies, even if they're not going to eat them. They can smell the smells. Some kids will dip their finger and try a sauce while you're making it, go to the table, and even if they liked it, say, oh, no, I don't eat this here. But it's a different place. It's like having a picnic or going to grandma's. You might try something new there than at the table. And if nothing else, they have the positive socialization. And they can get to the point, if they eat nothing, that they just like being with mom and dad, brothers and sisters, and they're happy. There's barriers, of course, and many of them that they might not feel good. They might be overwhelmed by all the smells, the sounds, what their siblings are saying. And then if they throw a fit, that can be stressful to everybody else at the table. And then time's a big, big factor. So what do? I tell parents, start slow. If you're doing 1 family meal a week, work up to 2. If you're doing 1 family meal a month, work up to 2. Maybe you do it at snack time or breakfast when it's just 2 of you. A family meal is 1 loving, caring adult with a child. And so if you need to start smaller, that's okay. Give them a warning that mealtime is coming, and that helps them know, okay, I need to stop playing. So if transition is an issue, that's a big deal. And talk about the food. That's a big one. Instead of them saying broccoli is yucky, you could say, oh, we don't say that at the table. You could say, this broccoli, it looks like a tree. This broccoli, it's crunchy. Oh, it has a big taste, or it's green. So if you want, you can say, well, we don't say it's yucky, but you must not like it. What don't you like about it? So again, you're giving them a different way to think about that food. Here's a good article by Marcia Dunn Klein about anxiety at mealtime. So if you're seeing that come up, I would encourage you to check that one out. This is from Kay Toomey, and it's Steps to Family Meals. And one big thing she says is don't let your child with special health care needs be the star of the show. They should be an equal participant. And maybe if you're doing therapy, don't do it at mealtime, do it at snack time. So that food chaining, that might not be the best place to enter it because we want it to be stress-free. We want it to be happy. Now, if your kiddo is somebody who will not eat any of the foods put before them, even they might allow it on their plate, what you could do is introduce a Sunday plate, and this is from Kay Toomey, and that's where you have the child dish the food onto a small plate, or you do it for them, and you set it by their plate, and usually at first they get really upset because they think they're gonna have to eat it. And you just calmly keep reassuring them you don't have to eat it, you push it away. So what that allows is eventually you can move that plate closer and closer as they get the whole idea, mommy and daddy aren't going to make me eat it. So eventually they can reach out and touch it. They can reach out and smell it. When they see big brother taking the same bite, they can do the same. If they do that, I would encourage you not to say anything or make a big deal beyond, hey, what was that like? And then move on because they know when they're getting attention for it and they're not gonna like it. But the biggest thing here is the cleanup time. That's where we have success with the someday plate. And a child can get to the point where they should be involved in cleanup so they can flick the pee off the plate. They can blow it off the plate so they're smelling it, they're getting it close to the mouth. Or a lot of toddlers really like to spit it into the trash can. And I know it sounds silly, but I've had a lot of toddlers who really like to do that because they know once it's in the trash can, they're not gonna have to eat it. It's kind of fun to do that, and then they get to experience the taste. So again, it's like, oh, that wasn't the worst thing in the world. Okay, I can handle it. So if you're feeling stuck with the food on the plate, that's one thing to try. Okay, here's some nutrition takeaways. And here's the resources that I wanted to tell you about. So these are things you can try at mealtimes if you're just feeling stuck, different ways to offer them. If you're a blog reader, I love to do it. These are by feeding therapists who work with children, and they have great, great articles on different topics from time to time. And these are just general nutrition resources. And that is it.